This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome to a deep dive into one of the most pivotal moments in history.
Oh, yeah.
The decision to use atomic bombs on Japan at the end of World War II. We're going to be exploring this through a history podcast episode called The Atomic Bombs, Military Necessity or Strategic Decision.
Interesting.
You might already know about the Manhattan Project, but did you know it cost over $30 billion in today's money?
Wow.
That's a lot riding on a single decision.
It really is. And what's fascinating is how this single event has been interpreted in so many different ways.
Right.
Each with its own compelling arguments.
Yeah.
Today we'll be examining the event from military, political, scientific, and even ethical angles.
Wow.
There are no easy answers,
Yeah.
which is why this deep dive is so important.
Okay, so let's set the scene.
Okay.
It's the summer of 1945. Japan is battered, but their military leaders refuse to accept unconditional surrender.
Right.
The Allies are facing Operation Downfall, a planned invasion of Japan.
And projections showed potential casualties in the millions.
Oh, wow.
It's under this immense pressure that the atomic bomb enters the picture.
Right, and that's the core tension here.
Okay.
Was the atomic bomb, with all its horrifying consequences, the only way to end the bloodshed?
Yeah.
Or were there other factors, perhaps even darker motives at play?
Okay, so the podcast jumps right into the military arguments.
Okay.
They cite the projected casualties from a traditional invasion, which were absolutely staggering.
Right.
And they point to the firebombing of Tokyo as a chilling example.
Okay.
Over 100,000 civilians died in that single raid.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder of the brutality of war, even before the atomic bomb entered the picture.
Yeah, the firebombing of Tokyo was a devastating event. But it's important to remember that many U.S. military leaders saw it as a grim preview of what a full-scale invasion of Japan could look like.
Yeah.
General Curtis LeMay, who led the bombing campaign, even said if we had lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals.
That's how brutal they expected the fight for Japan to be.
Wow, that's a powerful quote. It really underscores the fear and desperation that must have been present at the time.
Absolutely, and adding to that sense of urgency was the Potsdam Declaration.
Okay.
The Allies had issued this ultimatum, demanding Japan's unconditional surrender, but it was rejected. This rejection fueled the Orthodox school of thought, which holds that Japan's military leaders were fanatically committed to fighting to the death, no matter the cost.
The podcast also presents a counter-argument.
Okay.
Some historians believe Japan was already on the verge of collapse in August 1945.
Interesting.
They point to the Soviet Union joining the war and invading Manchuria.
Uh-huh.
This dealt a huge blow to Japan's already weakened military.
Yeah.
Could this have been the decisive factor rather than the atomic bombs?
That's a key question. It's true that Japan was seeking a negotiated peace. But there was a major sticking point as the status of the emperor. They wanted to ensure his position, which clashed with the Allies' demand for unconditional surrender. This is a detail that's often overlooked, but it was a central issue in the negotiations.
So even though Japan was trying to find a way out,
Yes.
their insistence on protecting the emperor made a quick and easy peace agreement impossible.
Exactly. This is where the Orthodox school view becomes particularly relevant.
Okay.
They argue that Japan's military leaders,
Yeah.
deeply influenced by the Bushido Code, saw surrender as dishonorable. This code, with its emphasis on loyalty, honor, and self-sacrifice, had shaped Japanese military culture for centuries.
Okay, so how did Bushido actually play out in real life?
Well,
give me an example.
Think about the Kamikaze pilots.
Oh, yeah.
They were willing to sacrifice their lives in suicide attacks, believing it was their duty to fight for the emperor until the very end.
Wow.
That level of devotion is a powerful testament to the influence of Bushido on the Japanese military mindset.
That's incredibly powerful and also incredibly sad.
Indeed, and it's this mindset that some historians believe made a traditional invasion of Japan so terrifying. The fear was that the entire population fueled by Bushido would fight to the death.
Right.
Leading to a bloodbath on an unimaginable scale.
So the Allies were stuck between a rock and a hard place?
Yeah.
A bloody invasion or the atomic bomb?
It seemed that way to many at the time.
Yeah.
But the podcast also introduces a fascinating what-if scenario.
Okay.
What if the U.S. had demonstrated the bomb's power without actually bombing cities?
Okay.
They discuss the idea of detonating it on an uninhabited island.
Yeah.
A terrifying show of force, but without the mass casualties.
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
Why didn't they consider that more seriously?
Well, U.S. military officials were deeply skeptical.
Okay.
They feared a demonstration might fail or worse,
Oh.
that it wouldn't even faze the Japanese leadership.
Uh-huh.
Remember, they were dealing with a culture steeped in Bushido. Some believed that even witnessing the devastating power of the atomic bomb wouldn't be enough to break their will to fight.
So according to this line of thinking,
Yeah.
a demonstration wouldn't have had the same psychological impact as the actual bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Precisely, and this is where the realist school comes in.
Okay.
They argue that only the utter devastation of those cities could function a swift and decisive surrender and potentially save lives in the long run by preventing a longer, more brutal war.
So the realists believe that the atomic bombs, as horrific as they were actually the lesser of two evils.
Yes, and they also pointed to the potential for continued bloodshed,
Okay.
even in a weakened Japan.
Yeah.
They argued that a prolonged war, even with Japan on its last legs,
Right.
would still result in significant casualties on both sides.
This is already so complex.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to consider.
Yeah.
The emerging Cold War.
Right.
By 1945, tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union were rising rapidly. How did that play into the decision to use the atomic bombs?
That's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Ah.
The bombings can be seen as a message to the Soviets,
Okay.
showcasing America's newfound power. The revisionist school takes this a step further,
Oh.
arguing that the bombs were used partly to limit Soviet influence in post-war Asia.
So the revisionists are saying that the U.S. wanted to end the war quickly before the Soviets could grab more territory.
Yes.
That way the U.S. could control the reconstruction of Japan and the region.
Exactly, by ending the war decisively and demonstrating their military superiority.
Yeah.
The U.S. could establish itself as the dominant power in the Pacific, limiting Soviet expansion and shaping the post-war world order.
It's incredible how a single event could have so many interwoven motives and interpretations.
Yeah.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer reveals something new and surprising.
Yeah.
But wait, there's another aspect we need to explore.
Okay.
The science and economics behind the bomb itself.
You're right that the Manhattan Project, as we mentioned earlier, was a massive scientific undertaking, costing billions. Some argue that this enormous investment created its own pressure to use the bombs. Almost like the U.S. needed to justify the cost and showcase their scientific prowess to the world.
It's a chilling thought, like, well, we spent all this money, we better use it.
It's a simplification, of course, but the scientific school does suggest that showcasing American technological might played a role in the decision.
Right.
It's a reminder that even scientific advancements can be caught up in the political and strategic currents of their time.
This is a lot to take in. We've gone from military strategy to the complexities of Japanese culture to Cold War politics and the sheer scale of the Manhattan Project.
It is a lot.
And we haven't even touched on the human cost yet.
You're right. We need to shift our focus now to the ethical considerations and the devastating impact the bombings had on the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That will be our main focus as we continue this deep dive.
Okay, sounds good.
Great.
It's hard to wrap your head around the sheer scale of human suffering caused by the atomic bombings. Tens of thousands of people died instantly in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
It's just heartbreaking.
Then there's the long-term suffering caused by radiation sickness.
It really underscores the weight of the decision we've been discussing.
Right.
The Moralist school confronts this head-on, arguing that using atomic bombs against civilians crossed a fundamental moral line, violating the very principles of warfare.
The podcast we're examining includes some gut-wrenching accounts from survivors. One woman describes seeing shadows burned onto walls, the outlines of people vaporized in an instant.
It's haunting.
Yeah.
These first-hand accounts force us to confront the human cost of the bombings.
Right.
Beyond statistics and strategic arguments. They remind us that behind every casualty number, there's a story, a family, a life irrevocably changed.
It makes the debate we've been discussing feel all the more real and all the more difficult, because how can you weigh military necessity against that level of human suffering?
That's the central question.
Yeah.
Some argue that the bombings ultimately saved lives by preventing a longer, even more brutal war.
Okay.
They point to the potential for millions of casualties in a traditional invasion of Japan.
But the moralist school contends that some lines should never be crossed.
Yeah.
Regardless of the potential benefits, the sheer scale of suffering, both immediate and long-lasting, is almost impossible to justify in their view.
And their argument raises crucial questions about the conduct of war.
Yeah.
Is there ever a scenario where the intentional targeting of civilians can be deemed morally acceptable?
Right.
Where do we draw the line?
It's a debate that has continued to this day, and it's one that becomes even more urgent when we consider the ongoing threat of nuclear proliferation.
Exactly. The atomic bombings were a watershed moment, not just for World War II, but for humanity as a whole.
Right.
They ushered in the nuclear age, an era defined by the constant threat of annihilation.
It's like the world woke up to a new and terrifying reality.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the power to destroy entire cities existed.
Right.
And the question became, would we be able to control it?
And as the podcast points out, that question is still relevant today. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki serve as a stark warning about the dangers of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And the potential for unimaginable destruction if they were ever used again.
It's a reminder that the lessons of this event aren't confined to the past.
Right.
They continue to shape our present and our future, influencing international relations, military strategies,
Absolutely.
and even our cultural understanding of war and peace.
The podcast highlights how the bombings sparked a wave of anxiety and fear,
Yeah.
a collective trauma that seeped into our culture.
Right.
We see it reflected in movies, literature, and even in our political discourse. The specter of nuclear war has loomed large for decades.
You can see how this event would have a profound psychological impact. It forces us to confront our own mortality in a very real way, and it makes you question, could it happen again?
That fear, that uncertainty is part of the legacy of the atomic bombings.
Yeah.
It's a legacy that we still grapple with today.
Right.
But alongside the fear,
Yeah.
there's also a call to action.
A call to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again.
Precisely. The bombings serve as a powerful reminder of the need for diplomacy, for international cooperation, and for finding peaceful solutions to conflict.
So having explored all these different perspectives, where does that leave us? We've gone from the battlefield to the halls of power, from scientific breakthroughs to profound ethical dilemmas.
Honestly, in a place of deep contemplation.
Yeah.
This isn't a topic with easy answers. We've seen how the decision to use the atomic bombs can't be reduced to a simple right or wrong.
Right.
There were military, political, scientific, and ethical dimensions all intertwined.
It feels like we've been on this roller coaster ride, going from the strategic considerations to the human stories, from the immediate aftermath to the long-lasting consequences.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
It is, and as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's keep those complexities in mind.
Okay.
It's not about passing judgment, but about understanding the forces that converged at this pivotal moment in history
Yeah.
and what it means for our world today.
It's clear that there's no single answer.
Yeah.
No easy way to wrap up a conversation as complex as this.
Right.
But I think that's the point, isn't it?
Absolutely. This deep dive wasn't about reaching a definitive conclusion or telling you what to think.
Yeah.
It was about providing you with a deeper understanding of the historical context,
Yeah.
the different perspectives, and the enduring legacy of this world-changing event.
We've heard from the Orthodox school emphasizing Japan's military commitment, the revisionists highlighting Cold War tensions,
Right.
and the realists focused on ending the war swiftly. We've also considered the scientific and economic factors, as well as the profound ethical arguments raised by the moralist school.
And what's important to remember is that these different schools of thought aren't mutually exclusive.
Okay.
It's entirely possible to acknowledge the validity of multiple perspectives
Yeah.
while still wrestling with the ethical implications.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot during this conversation.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the strategic debates or the political maneuvering,
Uh-huh.
but then you hear a survivor's story and it brings you right back to the human cost.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to engage with history on multiple levels.
Right.
We need to understand the big picture, the political and military context.
Yeah.
But we also need to remember the individual stories, the human lives, that were forever altered by this event.
The podcast we've been discussing does a good job of balancing those different levels of analysis.
Yeah.
It provides the historical framework,
Right.
but it also gives voice to these survivors. allowing us to connect with their experiences on a more personal level.
And I think that's crucial for any meaningful discussion of the atomic bombings. We can't just reduce it to a strategic decision or a political calculation.
Right.
We have to acknowledge the immense suffering, the moral dilemmas, and the long-lasting consequences that continue to shape our world today.
I'm struck by how this event continues to spark debate and discussion even decades later. It's like we're still trying to come to terms with what happened and what it means for us as a species.
That's the power of history. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths, to question our assumptions, and to learn from the past, even when it's painful.
One question that keeps coming back to me is this.
Okay.
Knowing what we know now about the long-term consequences of nuclear weapons, would the world have been better off if the atomic bomb had never been used?
It's a question without a definitive answer,
Right.
but it's one that we should all be asking ourselves.
Yeah.
It forces us to grapple with the ethical implications of scientific advancements and the immense responsibility that comes with wielding such destructive power.
It's a heavy question, but I think it's an important one to ponder as we navigate the challenges of the 21st century. We live in a world where technological advancements are happening at an unprecedented pace, and it's crucial that we learn from the mistakes of the past as we shape the future.
You're absolutely right. The atomic bombings serve as a stark warning about the potential for technology to be used for both good and evil.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that we, as a global community, have a responsibility to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again.
So where do we go from here? What are the key takeaways you hope our listener will remember from this deep dive?
I hope they'll remember that history is complex and multifaceted. There are always multiple perspectives, and it's important to engage with them all, even when they're uncomfortable or challenging.
Yeah.
I also hope they'll take away a sense of the enduring legacy of the atomic bombings and how they continue to shape our world today.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive has been a journey through history, ethics, and the human condition. We've explored the complexities of the decision to use atomic bombs, the devastating consequences, and the enduring questions that continue to haunt us.
Yeah.
We encourage you to continue exploring this topic, to delve deeper into the different perspectives, and to form your own conclusions about this pivotal moment in history. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.